Karoline Leavitt's account of trying a military meal for the first time began with a vivid and humorous description that immediately drew in her audience. She painted the picture of someone entirely unprepared for what was about to happen, setting the stage for a moment that was as enlightening as it was entertaining. She described the military-issued package being handed to her, a plain, vacuum-sealed pouch with bold block lettering, the kind of design that's all function and zero flair. There was no branding, no colorful label, just a utilitarian wrapper. That made her momentarily question whether she was about to eat food or assemble a tent. As she peeled open the package, she detailed each step with the kind of curiosity and disbelief that anyone outside the military could relate to. The contents inside were foreign to her, individually sealed components that resembled more of a science experiment than a meal. She held up a cracker that looked more like a ceramic tile than a snack, and the room erupted in laughter as she described tapping it against the table just to see if it would break. It didn't. Then came the entree, something labeled vaguely as beef stew, but which looked like it had been assembled in a lab somewhere beneath the Earth's crust. Her attempt to heat it up using the included flameless ration heater became a comedy of errors. She narrated the confusion of trying to activate the heating element by adding just the right amount of water and then waiting as the pouch began to emit steam and sizzle like it was undergoing some kind of alchemical transformation. There was a moment of panic, she admitted, when she wasn't sure if she had done it right, or if she had accidentally set off some kind of chemical reaction that would require a hazmat team. As the aroma of the meal began to fill the room, not necessarily a pleasant one, she soldiered on. Her commentary on the texture of the meat and the consistency of the sauce was delivered with the timing of a seasoned comedian. She didn't hold back in describing it as resembling something between canned dog food and airplane fare from the early 1990s. But rather than simply ridicule the meal, she found a way to celebrate it for what it represented. Sustenance in the most unforgiving of environments designed to fuel the human body under extreme conditions. What made her story resonate even more was how she connected each item in the ration to the everyday lives of those who consume it regularly. The instant coffee packet, barely enough to fill half a cup, was treated like liquid gold by those in uniform. The gum at the bottom of the pouch, which she initially thought was a bonus treat, turned out to serve a functional purpose, aiding digestion in the absence of regular meals. She laughed at herself for being naive about the process, but underneath the humor was a deepening awareness of the adaptability and resilience required of military personnel. Her tone shifted ever so slightly as she recounted these moments, not losing her lightness but allowing a thread of admiration to weave through her words. It wasn't just about the taste of the food, or the strange packaging, or the bizarre textures. It was about what it meant to rely on this type of meal as a source of energy and comfort while operating in places far from home, under high stress, with little rest. It was about understanding that what might seem unpalatable to the average civilian is in fact a vital lifeline for someone facing real danger. As she continued to explore the different parts of the meal, peanut butter in a tube, dehydrated, fruit, and the infamous mystery meat, her reactions were honest, and that honesty became the heart of her story. She never pretended to enjoy it, but she respected it. She marveled at how the design prioritized practicality over flavor, shelf life over presentation, and nutrition over pleasure. Each component served a purpose, and that purpose reflected the values of the people depending on it: endurance, resourcefulness, and efficiency. The humor didn't stop. There were still jokes about the dessert bar that required a dental pick to chew through. But what emerged most clearly was a growing appreciation. Through her candid, sometimes ridiculous experience, she allowed the audience to laugh with her while also confronting the reality of what it means to eat like a soldier. It wasn't a gourmet experience, but it was a deeply human one. Karoline Leavitt's delivery during her recounting of the military meal experience was laced with a sharp, spontaneous humor that had the entire room in stitches from the moment she began describing the contents of the meal. Her natural ability to spot the absurd in the mundane was on full display as she dissected each element of the pre-packaged ration with the enthusiasm and bewilderment of someone who had stumbled into a culinary time capsule. What made her observations so effective was the way she never tried to pretend to be above the experience. She embraced her confusion, her discomfort, and her genuine surprise with total authenticity. She began with the packaging, a drab olive pouch that, as she put it, looked like it was designed more to survive a nuclear winter than to be opened by a hungry person. As she fumbled with the seal, she joked that she half expected it to be booby-trapped, or at least demand a password. This set the tone for what would become a roller coaster of culinary discoveries, each more perplexing than the last. When she finally managed to open it, the first thing she pulled out was a brick-like cracker, which she dubbed the dental test. She knocked it against the table a few times to demonstrate its resilience, drawing a wave of laughter as she deadpanned, "If this doesn't break, neither will my spirit." Her commentary moved next to the heating pouch, which she regarded with a mix of scientific curiosity and mild terror. Watching the chemical reaction begin, she quipped that she felt like she was conducting an 8th grade science fair experiment, with the added challenge of not setting off the smoke alarms. When steam started rising from the pouch, she instinctively took a step back, raising her eyebrows and muttering, "Well, that's not ominous at all." Her timing was perfect, just enough pause to let the audience's imagination run wild before delivering the next punchline. As she opened the main course, a dish vaguely labeled as beef stew, she leaned into the mystery with full theatrical flair. Holding it up and giving it a tentative sniff, she exaggerated her reaction, squinting her eyes as if she were trying to detect hidden ingredients or maybe a secret message from the chef. She didn't just describe the taste, she performed it. With every grimace, every fake shudder, every dramatic sip of water to wash down a particularly chewy bite, she drew roars of laughter, not because she was mocking the meal, but because she brought such honesty to the table. One of the funniest moments came when she examined a side dish of rehydrated mashed potatoes. "These potatoes have been through things," she said solemnly, holding up a forkful like it was an ancient artifact. Her impression of someone trying to enjoy it, complete with polite chewing, a plastered-on smile, and a quick glance around the room for a napkin to discreetly dispose of it, was an exaggerated version of a universal experience. Trying to be polite in the face of something barely edible. The room loved it because they could relate. She made the unfamiliar feel familiar. Then there was the dessert. A compressed bar that she compared to something you'd find in a survival bunker. Or a child's toy set. She tapped it, listened for an echo, and asked with faux seriousness whether it doubled as a weapon. Even the included gum didn't escape her scrutiny. She popped it into her mouth, chewed a few times, and then paused dramatically. "It's like mint met cardboard, and they decided to get married," she said, shrugging, as if resigned to this odd new flavor profile. What truly elevated her humor, though, was its generosity. She wasn't laughing at the food so much as she was laughing with the audience, bringing everyone into the absurdity of the moment. She never mocked the necessity of the meal or the people who rely on it. Instead, she found the humanity in the situation and used it to forge a shared connection. Her jokes were never mean-spirited. They were observational, self-deprecating, and inclusive. Her natural rhythm, her knack for finding just the right detail to exaggerate, and her complete willingness to make herself the punchline all contributed to an atmosphere that was lighthearted, genuine, and unexpectedly warm. People weren't just laughing at her descriptions, they were laughing because she made them feel part of something oddly special. Through the cracked crackers, the bubbling stew, and the mysteriously chewy dessert, she turned an everyday military meal into a moment of collective hilarity. As Karoline Leavitt continued her storytelling, the mood in the room began to shift in a subtle but unmistakable way. What had begun as a comedic take on trying a military meal slowly transformed into something more intimate and emotional. The audience had laughed at her jokes and shared in the absurdity of her culinary adventure, but then, almost without warning, they found themselves pulled into a deeper reflection, led there gently by her sincerity. Her tone softened, not in volume but in weight, and her words started to reveal an unexpected layer of reverence behind the humor. She began to speak about the meal not just as an oddity or inconvenience, but as a symbol of something much greater. Holding up a nearly tasteless protein bar and the foil pouch it came in, she paused. Imagine this being your only hot meal for days, she said, her voice no longer joking. Imagine opening this in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from home, with nothing but silence and stress surrounding you. The room quieted. She let the weight of those words linger, not to create drama, but to give people space, to feel it. She talked about how, while she had the privilege of walking away from this meal and going home to a warm kitchen, there were people who relied on it daily without complaint. People who didn't get to pick what they ate, or when, or where. She described the realization as humbling, not in an abstract philosophical sense, but in a visceral, physical one. She'd felt it as she chewed through the dense, flavorless food. She'd felt it when the heater pouch hissed in her hands. She'd felt it when she saw how even the simplest things, like a cup of instant coffee or a stick of gum, could take on a kind of sacred value in that context. As she unpacked this perspective, her honesty created a bridge between her experience and the lives of those who eat those meals not as a joke, but as a necessity. There was no pretense in her voice. She didn't try to dramatize her point with exaggerated emotion. Instead, her vulnerability came through in the quiet moments, when she admitted she hadn't thought much about what went into preparing or consuming these meals before, when she recognized how easily we take for granted things like variety, flavor, or even the comfort of sitting at a dining table. She shared a moment of reflection that occurred as she stared at the sealed pouch in front of her, wondering about the hands that designed it, packed it, and carried it into faraway places. She acknowledged that up until then, the phrase military ration had meant almost nothing to her. It was just an abstract idea, a box on a supply list. But now it carried the weight of effort, of endurance, of sacrifice. And it wasn't just about the food. It was about what the food represented: readiness, discipline, resilience, and the quiet dignity of service that often goes unnoticed by the outside world. Her voice trembled slightly as she imagined someone sitting alone, miles from family, relying on this same pouch to provide a moment of familiarity, even warmth. I joked about the taste, she said, but to someone else this is dinner, comfort, maybe even a bit of home in a world that feels far from it. The audience, who just minutes earlier had been laughing, now sat in thoughtful silence. It was a shared moment of emotional clarity, brought about not through sentimentality, but through grounded truth. She connected this reflection to a broader idea, that sometimes we don't realize the depth of others' experiences until we step briefly into their shoes, even in the most superficial ways. She had stepped into that world for a few minutes, and it had changed the way she thought, not only about the meal, but about the people behind it, the people who live it. It wasn't about glamorizing hardship or pretending to understand it fully. It was about acknowledging it exists and that it deserves more than a passing thought. As she looked back over the tray of half-eaten ration components, she no longer saw them as weird or funny. She saw them as tools of survival, created with care, consumed with courage. She said she didn't expect to feel anything more than confusion or amusement when she began the experience, but what she ended up feeling was gratitude. Real, unfiltered, unexpected gratitude. And that was something no one in the room had seen coming.
Karoline Leavitt's story reached a powerful crescendo as she moved from sharing laughs and personal realizations to something more urgent and collective. With her natural ease and sincerity, she transitioned into a heartfelt message that resonated far beyond her own experience.
The quirky contents of a military meal had, up until that point, served as the focal point of her narrative, but now they became a vehicle for something greater, a call to recognize, support, and uplift the individuals whose lives are shaped by these meals, day in and day out. She didn't raise her voice or pound a podium. Instead, she let the strength of her conviction speak through her tone and the calm authority in her delivery. She spoke with clarity about the disconnect that often exists between everyday life and the sacrifices made by those in service. Most people, she said, go through their routines without ever considering what it means to eat in the field, to rest with a rifle nearby, or to receive mail that might not arrive for weeks. She admitted that she had once been one of those people, unaware of the small details that make up the daily reality of life in uniform. The meal had opened her eyes, not just to the physical elements, like the dense nutrition bar or the flameless heater, but to the emotional and psychological world these items occupy. She urged the audience to look past the packaging, past the jokes, and see the humanity inside that pouch. To imagine, just for a moment, what it would mean to rip one open in the desert or on a mountaintop or in the middle of a storm while on duty. What it would mean to find comfort not in flavor, but in consistency, in calories, in the knowledge that something, anything, was there to keep you going. Her voice took on a quiet insistence as she reminded the audience that support doesn't always have to be grand or public. It can be found in letters, care packages, moments of acknowledgement, and in the willingness to listen to a story without shifting the subject. She emphasized that appreciation should be an action, not just a feeling. It should be reflected in how we talk about service, how we teach our children, how we vote, and how we allocate attention in a world that often forgets the quiet heroes. She spoke about gratitude not as a once-a-year sentiment tied to a holiday, but as a daily practice, a lens through which we should see the world. It wasn't enough, she said, to feel proud of those who serve. That pride should be accompanied by a responsibility to understand their world a little better, to support their reintegration into civilian life, and to care for the families that wait for them back home. The military meal, in its simplicity and strange efficiency, had become a symbol of that world, a small, tightly packed expression of duty, structure, and survival. Her tone remained personal, but the message widened its reach. She called on the audience to carry the moment forward, not by trying military meals themselves necessarily, but by embracing the idea that understanding often begins with listening, and that listening can lead to change. Change in attitude, in action, and in how we show respect. The quiet applause that followed was not out of politeness, but recognition. She had asked them to do something simple and profound, to remember, to care, and to act. She acknowledged the ease with which we scroll past headlines or tune out stories that don't directly affect us, but she insisted that the lives of those in uniform are not distant. They are part of our community. They are neighbors, relatives, classmates, and friends. And if we're lucky enough to live in safety and comfort, it's not by accident. It's due, in large part, to those who eat those bland rations in places we might never see. What began as a humorous tale of eating an odd meal ended with a gentle but undeniable challenge. To do more than laugh, to do more than nod, and to do more than admire from afar. It was a challenge to close the gap between everyday civilian life and the quiet endurance of service. And she made that challenge feel both personal and possible, not through guilt or pressure, but by offering a glimpse into the world of those who serve, a world that, once seen, cannot be forgotten. As Karoline Leavitt wrapped up her speech, the laughter still echoing in the room gave way to a thoughtful silence that signaled something deeper had been stirred. She looked around, her expression steady, the emotion in her voice unmistakable, not heavy, but grounded. This was no longer just a story about trying a strange meal. It had evolved into a shared moment of understanding, one that bridged experience with empathy, humor with humility. She thanked the audience not just for their attention, but for allowing themselves to be moved, to laugh openly, and to reflect quietly. That willingness, she said, was a form of service in itself, showing up with open minds, ready to see something familiar in a new light. She reminded them that her experience with the military meal was just a brief taste, a symbolic gesture, but one that had unexpectedly shifted her perspective. It had taught her that often the things we mock or overlook can carry meaning far beyond what we initially see. Sometimes, all it takes is a few bites of a bland, vacuum-sealed entree to realize how insulated our lives can be from the sacrifices others make on our behalf. As she began her final thoughts, she returned to the moment she first held the meal in her hands, how she laughed, how she cringed, how she was surprised by her own reactions. And then how, later, she felt something unexpected. Respect. Not the ceremonial kind, but the quiet, personal kind that grows from encountering something, real and unpolished, That kind of respect, she said, is the foundation of gratitude. And gratitude, when nurtured, leads to responsibility. The responsibility to see, to care, and to act. She encouraged everyone in the room to carry the story forward, not as a tale about bad food or awkward chewing, but as a reminder that behind every uniform is a person with daily struggles, routines, hopes, and humor. They're not abstract symbols or distant heroes. They're real people who eat, sleep, worry, and serve, often without recognition. Her closing message wasn't dramatic or grand. It was honest, deliberate, and deeply human. Let's not wait for the perfect moment or the perfect words, she said. Let's just start with awareness, with appreciation, with a little more effort to understand what others carry. Even if all we ever do is listen more closely, laugh a little kinder, and remember a little longer, that too can make a difference. As she stepped back, the applause that followed wasn't just a reaction to a well-delivered speech. It was a response to a truth that had landed. One that reminded everyone in that room that empathy often starts with something simple, like a story, a laugh, a shared meal, and grows into something